Haven't we? Okie dokie. Welcome everyone to the Make Equality Real campaign MP briefing session. We've got an hour, so I'm not going to waffle on for too long because we've got lots of contributions to come in. But this campaign is the aim of the campaign is to build and empower a mass movement throughout our society to oppose austerity. And we wanting to seek the adoption of the socio-economic duty to be added to the Equality Act 2010 as part of stopping future austerity policies. And we're a coalition representing workers and the wider community, including head teachers, educational psychologists, social workers, probation staff, performers, visual artists, musicians, hospitality workers, including Black and other racialised communities and marginalised groups who face discrimination. And we've got a broad range of experiences in our coalition and skills and social weight that would be an asset to the successful implementation of this policy by our new government. So we're calling on the government to establish a commission to begin this work and include the Make Equality Real campaign as key participants in the commission, ensuring the participation of communities, workers and their trade unions in the delivery. Because we believe a commission can establish the most effective and supportive set of mechanisms to promote the socio-economic duty and ensure that it is delivered successfully across all policy making bodies. So this session, that's a bit of an introduction. If you want to ask any questions throughout for the MPs that are on, if you pop it in the Q&A box, we'll have a look at what time we've got. We might bring you in to ask it live. If not, I will read out the questions for the speakers. But first of all, we're going to hear from some of the coalition members who are going to talk to us for about 5 or 6 minutes each to describe the impact of austerity on each of their professions. Then we're going to bring in Priya from the Equality Trust to talk to us about the socio-economic duty. Then Henry Fowler from the GFTU is going to explain what we're calling for and the actions that yourselves can take, and then we'll sort out some questions and answers. So without any further ado, I will bring in Dave Callow first, who's a qualified social worker. He's been a qualified social worker for 7 years with extensive experience in child and family practice. Dave is programme lead for the MSc Social Work at University of Lincoln and a dedicated trade union activist. He joined the Social Workers Union in 2018 and achieved his union contact status in 2019 before being elected as the chair of SWU in 2022 and 2024. So Dave, if you want to come in, please, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to talk a bit about from a social workers union point of view. So social workers are often the first line of support for individuals and families that may find themselves in vulnerable and desperate situations. They provide essential services in areas such as child protection, mental health, disability support, and older people's care. However, austerity has placed an immense strain on these services, limiting the ability of social workers to meet the growing needs of an ever-changing society. While austerity cuts were seen by some as necessary, the political decision or political choice to undermine society's safety net has and continues to have far-reaching consequences for many people, as well as social work and social workers. Public sector budget cuts have led to fewer resources, leaving social workers overstretched and under-resourced. As a result, social workers have faced increasingly heavy caseloads, making it difficult for them to provide the personalised care and attention that people sometimes need. So what we have is a social worker who is responsible for managing dozens of cases, not always able to provide the follow-up support needed or be there at crisis point. This can have devastating consequences for people who depend on these services, particularly children, older people, and those with complex needs. Austerity has a direct impact on the mental health and well-being of social workers themselves. With increasing workloads and fewer resources, social workers often face burnout, stress, and emotional exhaustion. Many enter the profession with a passion for helping others, but find themselves unable to provide the quality of care that they wish to due to system constraints. Constant exposure to distress of service users, combined with own professional challenges, can negatively affect their own mental health. The emotional burden can lead to compassion fatigue, as well as higher staff turnover and a reduced workforce. After all, we know there is a recruitment and retention crisis in social work at this time. So social workers may not have time to build strong, trust-based relationships with people or provide the depth of support that they need. We also have to consider the possibility that an overworked social worker can make mistakes. Austerity destroys the lives of people. With everyone squeezed, many people find themselves in crisis situations. The social workers then have a higher number of cases at crisis level. Add to this the demanding nature of the role, and you have this vicious cycle of demand against strict resources where they try to compete with each other. When we consider the impact of austerity on people's social workers' support, it's perhaps not surprising that the stress of living with reduced social services is a negative factor in poor mental health. Service users may experience higher rates of depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems due to the instability and lack of support in their lives. Like many features within our society, austerity disproportionately affects the poorest and most vulnerable people first. Beyond the immediate effects of individuals, austerity also undermines long-term community resilience. Social work plays a crucial and critical role in addressing the root causes of problems like poverty and inequality. By helping families stay together, supporting vulnerable adults, and protecting at-risk children, social workers create more stable and cohesive communities. However, austerity weakens that support system, increasing the risk of long-term societal challenges. Ultimately, austerity sends a troubling message about the value of social services in our society. It suggests that support for people is dispensable, that people are dispensable, rather than essential to the well-being of our community. It doesn't have to be this way. Investing in social work is not only a moral obligation, it's economically sound. Early intervention and prevention programs save governments money in the long term by reducing the need for more costly services, but it can prevent further human pain and suffering. It's our duty of care to surely do the best we can to prevent this. To conclude here, austerity's long-term impact on social work is devastating. It limits the ability of social workers to provide crucial services, increases stress and burnout. It harms individuals and communities that rely on their support. It stretches the capacity of social workers to breaking point, increasing stress on social workers, and reduces the quality and accessibility of care for vulnerable people. A combination of financial strain and increased demand and fewer resources makes it harder to achieve the outcomes we need. As a society, we must recognise that the well-being of our most vulnerable people is not an expendable cost. Instead, it should be the heart of our economic policy aimed at creating a fair, just and prosperous future, one in which no one is left behind. The Social Workers Union is proud to support the Make Equality Real campaign and believes that equality is a moral duty within our society. We are proud to stand in solidarity with our partners in this campaign. Social work values of human rights and social justice are aligned with equality. Social work skills of empathy and compassion and respect are aligned with equality. When equality is real, people from all walks of life can reach their full potential. It's better for them and it's better for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dave. And you're right, equality for everybody. That's fundamentally what we need. Our next speaker is Sean Octagon from the Association, is the National Officer for the Association of Educational Psychologists, a trade union and professional body for educational psychologists. He actually is one. He also works as a tutor, training educational psychologists on the doctoral training programme at the University of Sheffield, so he's not that far away from me in Wakefield. Sean has worked in Yorkshire since 2018 and has prior experience working in education as both a teacher and a teaching assistant. Sean, you are very welcome.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who's attended this meeting for giving up your time. So I've been asked to speak to you about the impact of austerity on the profession of educational psychology. Being as a core aspect of educational psychology is working with children, young people and families, I wanted to start by briefly recounting 3 experiences I've had while working as an EP in Yorkshire over the last year or so. The first is a home visit I arranged to meet with a mother and her 3 children who live in social housing. I remember going into the house and how bitterly cold it was. There was black mould all the way up the walls and ceiling. The second is a school visit where I was supporting another family in an inner city area. A 13-year-old boy was being repeatedly put in isolation for being late and not bringing proper equipment. Even when it transpired that the reason he was late was because he was his mother's primary carer and he had to be at home to support his mother and sister in their morning routine, the school maintained that he was breaking school rules and continued to sanction him for being late. The last is a multi-agency meeting arranged by social care that I attended due to strong concerns I had about an 8-year-old boy's safety. Also in attendance were colleagues from social work and school representatives. Whilst we had no proof to act on, we suspected that the boy was being taken advantage of by drug dealers in the local area and that he was involved in drug dealing as a form of income. I recall a sense of hopelessness and helplessness as everyone looked to each other to think of ways forward to improve the situation, but no one had a solution. These are just 3 of hundreds of experiences I could have talked about, from parents who can't afford to get the bus to meetings, to children who can't play outside because of gang-related violence in their community. Austerity is terribly affecting the people we work with. My role in each of these cases was to provide psychological support so that the children involved could experience a sense of well-being in their subjective selves and make progress in their learning and communication with others. EPs normally do this through some form of information gathering and psychological assessment, eliciting child voice and working with the school system to support positive change at both the individual and the environmental level. However, in all these situations, it was austerity that was the primary issue preventing these children from flourishing, and even preventing them from just getting by day to day. Each child was in a crisis because of the poverty, inhumane social housing, and lack of community support that austerity had caused. These sorts of stories are very common in our work, and they're only getting worse. Educational psychologists cannot do our job supporting children and families in their psychological progress until their basic need for safety, shelter, and economic security are met. The effects of austerity are not limited to the home, but also the school, where per pupil funding is 8% lower than it was in 2010. When I started my career in education as a teaching assistant, I was part of a vibrant department of TAs. Now schools consistently find it hard to allocate teaching assistants or other vital resources to support children, even when it's advised by an EP. This drop in funding makes it harder for schools to be inclusive spaces for all children, and in doing so, it creates a lower threshold for what we might consider as special educational needs. Inclusive, flexible provision benefits all children, particularly those with special educational needs, but it's only possible through public investment. The vast majority of EPs contribute to the public services that have been so horrendously devastated by austerity. Whilst I wanted to centre children and families at the heart of what I had to say, it's also important to discuss how the job of the EP has been affected by austerity. Like other public services, our offer to communities has been cut to the bone. Austerity has meant our offer is no longer effective because there's a huge shortage of EPs and our schools are allocated very little time. Not enough EPs are being funded through training, exacerbating this issue. EP support generally works best as early intervention, getting in early and supporting change before the issue becomes bigger. It works best when we can develop ongoing relationships with children, families, and teachers over a period of time. It works best when we can work with teachers who don't feel overwhelmed and overworked. It works best when we have time to be involved in the implementation of the advice we give. Too often, an EP's involvement is limited to a single visit and a written report before moving on to the next child. In order to make up for local authority budgetary shortfalls caused by austerity, many EP services have moved to a traded model, meaning that schools have to pay for our time. This means that the EP offer is becoming less and less universal, starting to only become available to schools who can afford it and parents who can pay for our time privately. Ultimately, I see the role of the EP as working in collaboration with other public service professionals, from the teacher to the social worker to the doctor, to provide support for children and families to live happy and fulfilled lives. But until the basic needs of children and families are met, it's going to be incredibly difficult to ensure this work is effective. All children and families in this country should be entitled to the basic provision of social security in a very literal sense. Everyone should have enough resources to live happy and comfortable lives in comfortable conditions. This should not be seen as a nice to have, but as an essential baseline from which professionals such as educational psychologists can provide further support if necessary. Due to austerity, many children and families we work with do not experience physical safety. Creating the sense of psychological safety needed to work towards positive change is borderline impossible in these conditions. In the 6th largest economy in the world, this is unacceptable. We need real change. We at the Association of Educational Psychologists hope that the commencement of the socioeconomic duty would help us start realising that change in a way that ensures that everyone can live in dignity, public services can be resourced adequately, and in the case of my profession, EPs can work effectively towards supporting the psychological and educational needs of children and families. Thank you for listening.
Thanks ever so much, Sean. Another really powerful contribution, really outlining the impact not only of your members, but our community as well, and which impacts everybody, doesn't it? I did realise halfway through when you were talking, I've done great introductions for both of you, but I didn't actually introduce myself. And I know people could presume that I'm Sarah Woolley from the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, but they may not know that I'm also the president or the current president of the General Federation of Trade Unions as well. So our union looks after and supports and represents workers throughout the food industry and allied trades. And whilst I'm not going to be speaking about the impact of austerity on our members during this meeting, I can echo everything that's already been said by the two fantastic speakers, and we've done a lot of work in the last few years around like access to food and the impact of the cost of living crisis on our members as well. But enough from me. Ian is back and we can see him. So our last speaker in this session is Ian Lawrence, who is the General Secretary of the National Association of Probation Officers, who's just had their AGM. He's also the Vice President of the General Federation of Trade Unions. He'll be taking over in May, all being well, as President. And yeah, Ian's been with NAPO since 2008, where he jumped into NAPO from the PCS, the Public and Commercial Services Union, and he's done so much work. You know, he's one of the first for many years as a senior trade union leader from the BAME community. He's another term now as General Secretary, and he also sits on the TUC General Council as well as the GFTU Executive. And it does say Ian lives in Biggin Hill, Kent, not as far up north as Yorkshire. Ian, you are very welcome.
Well, look, Sarah, thank you so much. And for everybody that's on the call today, precious time, I know, for you, but also to the GFTU and affiliates for getting this campaign organised. So I want to talk about the impact of austerity on the clients that probation looks after, but also on our members. And there's an interaction between the two. And essentially where I start is where I'm going to finish. If this government, with its mantra of investment, wants to see a change to public services, then it must invest in those public services. It must invest in the criminal justice system, particularly, because everybody here is aware of the crisis in prison capacity, the crisis in probation, and the impact that that has on wider society. So I just want to give you a few takeaways to think about here. The first thing I'd say is in terms of what our members do, it's pretty obvious that to reduce reoffending is not something a probation practitioner can do on their own. Their reliance on other agencies in the UK is absolutely paramount. And just by way of a few examples, interaction with agencies such as the police themselves, the police service has not only seen a reduction in uniformed officers, but a whole load of cuts to backroom functions as well. All of that impacts on things like gathering information, exchanging information between probation and the police. It also impacts on how probation itself is able to plan its own management system around probation and dealing with clients and their particular needs. The impact of austerity is also seen in terms of the inability on occasions to get important information or give important information to our sister agencies. This is particularly important in the field of managing sex offenders, a very complex area of work. We've now seen the sex offender teams that were built up over many years of expertise decimated by HMPPS. And as I said at our annual conference last week, this is a serious issue, and one that we intend to return to with government ministers going forward, because it is a threat to public safety. Looking more in terms of how this austerity regime has impacted on our clients, well, you'll have seen the publicity around the early release of prisoners scheme. The new scheme is up and running. First tranche of releases was early into September, and we now have another tranche of early release prisoners coming out in October. Now, what our members are telling us is that already we're seeing the detrimental impact of that in terms of people's inability to find accommodation. It means that a large proportion of those already released early will probably now find their way into the recall system and will be serving further short terms in prison before coming back out into the same cycle again. This might be a palliative to deal with crowding in prison cells, but it is not a long-term cure. So we are extremely concerned at this in terms of how we're going to reintegrate people into society, which, because of austerity, as you well know, means there's been massive pressure on support services out there, particularly in the field of housing, where there's a scarcity already, but also in terms of the fact that some housing associations, some local authorities are extremely reluctant to release accommodation to people with a criminal conviction, often overlooked fact. And therefore that adds to the pressure on them and adds to pressure on our members as well. So there's other issues that are important. Cuts to children's services have an impact in terms of our practitioners' ability to interact with agencies, make safeguarding checks at the tiniest moment. There are issues around health provision in our communities, particularly the lack of mental health support. Many people coming out of short-term or any prison sentence actually face mental health difficulties. If there's nowhere to go, nowhere for support, then the likelihood is they're going to creep back into recidivism and be back in the system in short order. And that ties in with the demise of funding for charities who do an important job filling in the gaps, voluntary sector. I watched a program on TV the other week, and it was quite emotional to see these brave volunteer workers in their community. It happened to be in Hull, I think, trying their best to find accommodation for desperate people, trying their best to put them in touch with the right agencies, and just not having the governmental support that they need. But all this has been caused by the last 14 years of austerity, and that's why it has to change. So there are probation clients who themselves are parents and are looking for support, like Sure Start, and there's been a withdrawal of that as well over many years. So that's just a snapshot, colleagues, of some of the practical problems that are out there for our members in trying to help clients who, if they're not helped, will find their way back into the criminal justice system. So on pay for probation staff, despite the fact that we secured a 3-year pay deal, which has now come to its end, our members' pay has risen by a paltry 7.6% since 2010. And the cost of living in that period has gone up to 81.5%. So we would need something like a 68% pay rise to restore parity. Well, clearly we're not going to get that, but clearly we are coming to this government to treat our requests on pay seriously, because if we don't get that investment, then you're going to see even more disillusioned workers leaving a hard-pressed profession. And why is that important? Because these senior members of probation teams are the people who young trainees just coming in are going to have to rely upon for help and peer support. And if they have had enough, then you can't expect young people coming in to tolerate the pressures of huge vacancies and overwork, sometimes to the extent of 160% of capacity. So all of this is contriving to cause serious staff disillusionment, and it needs to be addressed. And I make no apologies for repeating the message that if this government is just going to do what previous governments have done, you'll just get the same results that you have. So I'm hopeful from the early engagement with Shabana Mahmood and James Timpson that we are going to see a new approach. We certainly believe they understand the problems in probation, but my message is you've got to invest in the criminal justice system if you're going to actually create a better society in the long term. Look, Sarah and Collins, hope that's helpful, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Ian, and for giving us a perspective, you know, that it's not just communities that we can see every day as well. It's the communities that need our support that we can't always see because they're behind the walls of prisons, and then they're coming back out rehabilitating and trying to move back into a community that we also need to think about, and the impacts of austerity and how that's not only impacted the people working in probation and family courts, but the people actually needing the support of that. We've just got a note that they've got a vote in the Commons, so some of the MPs will probably have to jump off. But we're recording this, so we will continue because they'll be able to watch it back. And I'm not sure it's all MPs that are on there. I think there's some office support as well. So we will move on to our next speaker, Priya Sani Nicholas from the Equality Trust. And Priya is the co-executive director of the Equality Trust with a focus on external affairs, communications and media and new business development. And she holds a BSc in psychology and a postgraduate diploma in strategic management. So Priya, you're very welcome. Come and talk to us about what is socio-economic duty?
Oh, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much to all the speakers before me who so eloquently shared their experiences of their members and their clients, and putting into context so superbly the devastating impacts that austerity are having on so many people. So I've come today to talk about the socioeconomic duty. The Equality Trust is a small micro charity set up in 2009 with the purpose to dismantle structural inequalities of income, wealth and power. And we've been working on commencement of the socioeconomic duty since about 2016. So I'll just do a broad brush approach to start with, and then hone it in on the socioeconomic duty. So I think we all know that the UK is one of the most unequal countries in the world. And despite being one of the richest countries, our levels of inequality have actually been growing over the time. And research paper after research paper after research paper over decades have shown us that in countries and communities with high levels of inequality, more people suffer from ill health, with people dying younger and getting sick earlier. There are higher incidences of mental health problems, including addiction. Educational attainment is lower, and there is greater distrust in democracy, and people report that they are more unhappy. And in contrast, in countries with higher levels of equality, people are healthier, they live longer and in better physical and mental health. Crime and rates of imprisonment are lower, and people feel safer and happier. So it's you know, the argument is that it's of benefit to everybody in society to make our communities and countries more equal. And one way that we can be looking at doing that is by enacting the socioeconomic duty. And the socioeconomic duty is Section 1 of the Equality Act, which was drafted in 2010 by the Brown Labour government, and it was ratified by the incoming Tory and Lib Dem coalition of 2010. And they brought in every part of that act except for this Section 1, the socioeconomic duty. And it is sometimes called the clause that could have stopped austerity. And that's because it requires all public bodies to pay due regard when exercising strategic decisions to make sure that they do so in ways that are designed to reduce inequality of outcome, which result from socioeconomic disadvantage. So in those few words, there is really important recognition of two really solid things. Firstly, is that socioeconomic disadvantage in itself can go on to lead to inequality of outcome for people. So that's not inequality of opportunity, it's inequality of outcome. So just by being poor, your outcomes can also, you can have inequality of outcomes just from that fact. And the second thing that I think is really important that the socioeconomic duty emphasises is that public bodies have a direct role to play in achieving equality of outcome. It is part of their remit and part of their job to make sure that we have equality of outcome. So at the moment, the state of play in the UK at the moment is that Scotland as a nation in 2018, and then Wales followed suit in 2021 when devolved powers allowed them to. So the socioeconomic duty is commenced in both of those countries. It's mandatory for all public bodies to give this due regard, and that there are some local authorities in England that are either have adopted it mandatorily, or they are working in the spirit of the socioeconomic duty, and these are local authorities across the kind of gamut from rural and seaside towns to towns, metropolitan locations, and London boroughs. And it's really great to see that the Labour Party have got SED in their manifesto, and they do seem to be working hard behind the scenes to make sure that commencement is meaningful. So they're even looking at opening up the Act for primary legislation to make sure that it is more kind of fit for purpose in the 2020s. So the kind of big takeout here really is that commencement must be meaningful. So along with the guidance and legislation, we need to be thinking about compliance and accountability. So our friends in Scotland who have had obviously the socioeconomic duty commence since 2018, so like nearly 6 years there, 7 years there, their kind of take is that the legislation and the guidance that they've got there is fit for purpose. It works well, it's easy to understand, and it's got really solid guidance. But we do know that it hasn't had the impact that, you know, we might have hoped for it to have. And they point the blame firmly at the door of not enough compliance and accountability. So we would advocate strongly that measures once commencement has been put in place, we need compliance and accountability. And the second huge takeout that we would be recommending is that people with lived experience and local residents and trades unions and other community groups are part of the commencement for what change we want to see and how to keep local authorities and public bodies accountable for the changes. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Priya, for making what seems to be like a really complicated thing so understandable. When you just look at it, it's a bit like, I've no idea what you're talking about, but actually you make it so understandable so that we do know what it means and we do understand the importance of it. So thank you for that. So we'll move swiftly on to Henry Fowler, who is the Head of Education, Campaigns and Organising at the General Federation of Trade Unions and its Educational Trust. So he's very busy all the time. And Henry's going to talk to us about what we're calling for, the actions that MPs can take. And yeah, so Henry, over to you.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, colleagues, for being here. And fantastic to have the testimony from so many in different professions and the expertise of Priya and the Equality Trust. So my bit is going to be very short. I'm going to talk about what we are calling for, why it's different to other campaigns that are campaigning against austerity for the commencement socioeconomic duty. And then I want to talk about the multiple of actions that you can now take, which are part of the growing base of support we have within Parliament that goes alongside the support that we've got outside it. So I'm just going to try and share that now. So what we're calling for. So as Priya has said, there's been a lot of headway made on this by the new government, and it was in the manifesto of the Labour Party at the election. That said, this campaign is clear that we need a commission, not for the sake of a talking shop, but a commission that is led by and includes the entirety of representation of our society. And we believe that trades unions, community groups, campaign groups, and the third sector have a really vital place within that. We don't think a commission should just be talking for a long period of time. So we've set it some clear outcomes that we think that it needs to discuss and to publish. And that is, you'd expect this from a coalition that's mainly trades unions, the promotion and participation in the role of equalities reps within our bargaining structures to be the kind of gatekeepers of this type of policy and its enactment and roll it out across the public and also private sector as we look at rebalancing the power and wealth in this country towards working people. We want to incorporate public participation for the meaningful engagement of those closest to the issue and the key principles of the SED. Priya has talked about examples we have from around the rest of the UK, which are vital for us to understand how best to commence this at a Westminster-based level. Most importantly, and we can't get away from this, is the appropriate funding, not just for the entirety of our economy. We're, going back for over 14 years of austerity and the damage that everyone has talked about that it's done to their respective parts of and sectors of that they work in, but actually to ensure that there's appropriate funding of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who would be the regulator of this policy, the place that people could go to challenge government and public policy holders around their ability to ensure that their policies comply with the socioeconomic duty. And also to the development of strong, clear, I think that that's important, and supportive training of policymakers throughout society to understand it. This has not been done at the scale in which we're talking about. It's been done in respective nations and local authority level, but to do it at a Westminster level and to commence that will require the support of government to ensure that people and policyholders are able to do that. It's important to say that this coalition is an anti-austerity coalition that believes the socioeconomic duty can be the tool in which we can start to both stop austerity in the future and also undermine it as a political, as a set of politics and economics. So that's why we're here today, is the actions that you can take, and it's really important to us. So launched today, thanks to Neil Duncan-Jordan, who's one of the MPs who's been supporting this campaign from the off, with Early Day Motion 258. So if you've not already, or you're thinking about it, hopefully this call's convinced you, and the questions and contributions people have after me will convince you even further. So please sign Early Day Motion 258. As I said, become part of that growing parliamentary campaign group. So we're looking for people to ask questions of government, follow-ups, to write to Cabinet Office. We have had MPs already do that, which is fantastic. Secure Westminster Hall debates, meet with delegation from the campaign groups. We do that regularly with individual MPs to go into a bit more detail, to link it back to local and constituency-based issues, and to also meet with that group of MPs, like I said, that is growing cross-party for the demands that we're making, which is not just the commencement of socioeconomic duty, but a commission with the full public eye and a real whole society look at how do we end austerity, not just for this generation, but forever, and how do we repair that damage. And last but not least, and this is why we've done this MP briefing, organised quite quickly because we thought it was important, alongside the written briefing we sent you in early September, and we'll resend again after this email, after this call, sorry. We want you to come and support the Budget Day demonstration against austerity. It's being planned by members of this coalition. It will be opposite Downing Street. More details will be confirmed shortly and they'll be sent to you, but that's between 3 and 5 p.m. It's really important that we understand socioeconomic duty is, for us, a vital tool, but also we have to end austerity for good, and we need to make equality real. So we hope that you can come and support the actions that we're asking you to take and help us build the strongest campaign possible so that we see a commission for the commencement of the socioeconomic duty and an end to austerity. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks ever so much, Henry, for that whistle stop tour, and yeah, please do sign up to the EDM, and anything else that you can do as a group of MPs to support this getting where it needs to be. So we've had a couple of questions, and we've plenty of time for responses. So what I'll do is I'll ask the two questions and then I'll pass it over to you in order that you spoke initially, if that's okay, to come in and respond. So for Dave, Ian and Sean, what would be the impact of more austerity on your services and your members? So if you could have a think about that, please. And then for Priya, could you give a practical example or practical examples of the impact of the socio-economic duty and what it means for communities? Okay, I think you did a little bit of that, but just to emphasize it further, please. So, Dave, do you want to come in? What would happen if we had more austerity?
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you for that question. Yeah, as you can probably imagine, things are already at breaking point, and more austerity is only going to add to that. And we've already got a stretched workforce, which I talked about earlier, that is dealing with people in desperate times. If we continue to increase that, where is that going to lead us? It's only going to lead us to more and more desperate situations where desperate people do desperate things, and it's not going to lead to a good position for our society. It's not going to lead to a society where we can look after those vulnerable people in our society. It's going to lead to social workers not able to continue to manage the high caseloads that we have, and we're in the midst of a retention and recruitment crisis. We're trying to recruit social workers. We're desperately trying to recruit them, In child and family safeguarding, for instance, it's usually 5 or 6 years before people start to burn out. Now, if we're not careful, we are going to end up with a situation where those social workers left behind are going to be picking up even more and more and more. And there are lots of instances where things are not getting dealt with as they should be already because of lack of people to be able to do that job. So it's only going to get worse.
Certainly is. Thank you, Dave. Sean?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems with psychology is the way it's sometimes used to kind of separate the mind from the body, right? And then you can pull yourself together, right? You can think more positively and you can somehow change the world around you just by changing the way you think. And of course, this is just not true. And the reality of the fact is the mind is as much a part of the body as any other part of the body. And so what we need to be thinking about is the material world that people live in and how that material world can affect people's subjective experience. So for me, the impact of continued austerity would be, the impact of continued poor mental health for people. And we know we live in a kind of society where we have a mental health crisis at the moment, but that's not because people can't just think their way through it. It's because people aren't given the resources they need to live psychologically healthy lives. And actually what we need to do is bring the mind back into the body and then bring the body back into a conversation around politics. What is happening to people's bodies? How free are people to choose where they put their bodies, that kind of thing. What's the quality of their housing? These are the kind of questions that we need to bring back into psychological consideration. And then logically, we need to kind of solve the problems of people's, material lived experiences to support their psychological flourishing. That is my strong opinion on this. And then, of course, when we think specifically about the educational psychologist, really, if we want children to be doing well at school and we want them to be focusing on their schoolwork, we can't have them worrying about every other thing in their life, like, are they going to be able to eat tonight? Are they going to be able to go home safely? These kinds of things. So really for me, psychology sometimes is putting the cart before the horse. What we need is security and equality in society, and then psychologists will much more be able to support people's psychological well-being. And so, yes, for me, that's why austerity needs to end. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Ian?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. It's a very profound analysis, and I wouldn't argue with a word of it. But I just want to focus on a couple of things in terms of that question. I think I've already explained how the austerity has caused cuts to vital services for the clients that we serve. But there's a political dimension to this as well. And I think I saw some of that in the aftermath of the disgraceful, racist, Islamophobic societal disorder recently, where the lack of hope for many people who are at the fag end of the system as it stands. And I'm not just talking about ex-prisoners, I'm talking about people who live in poverty anyway, but certainly it would apply to people who are ex-offenders, who have no roof, who have no support system, who have nothing that would encourage them to change their lifestyle and seek work, for example, is itself a real issue. Because I watched some documentaries after the disorder, and there were a number of former offenders interviewed, amongst others. And basically the message was that in their view, the Reform Party was the only party that was listening to them and was offering any sort of hope whatsoever. And I think it's incumbent on all of us in positions of authority to disabuse society of that notion that somehow this particular party offers a way through, when in fact what we need is investment in our infrastructure, investment in our public services, and investment in support services to try and get people back in a lifestyle that in which they're going to do some good. So I think there's a worry here. If we get more of the same, I think we're going to see even more societal disorder going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Priya, just before I bring you in, I'm going to abuse my position of chair and just, I was thinking whilst the three of you are talking about the impact on your members, I can categorically say that after running the surveys that we did with our members in 2021 and 2023 about their access to food during the pandemic, about how they coped through the height of the cost of living crisis, or didn't, as the case may be, that we will see, if there's a continuation of austerity, we will see further mental health crisis, we will see, you know, people freezing to death, starving, other health related issues, because they'll continue to have to eat, you know, rubbish, cheap food that has got no nutrients in it whatsoever. There'll be a lack of support because the services in the community will continue to be cut. There will be antisocial behaviour because there'll be no youth clubs for the children to go to, and the parents will be having to do stupid overtime hours just to try and make ends meet. And it's just this, it'll just continue to be a trajectory of what we've seen over the last few years: increase in food bank reliance, increase in going hungry, skipping meals, and just, you know, feeling like our members are telling us that they feel like the home is a prison. We're going into winter again, energy prices aren't going down, and they feel like their home's a prison now. What's it going to be like if we have more austerity? It's going to be even worse, isn't it? And we're going to see more and more key workers, people that keep this economy going every single day, whether you can see them or not, literally starving and freezing to death. And that's what, for me and the members that our union supports, I think that's what austerity continuing means for us. You know, freezing, going hungry, and people will literally be dying. And that sounds, you know, catastrophizing, I know, but it's a reality. We've had 14 years of it, and even 14 more months is far too long. So yeah, sorry, that was me just jumping in. Priya, did you want to come in on your question?
Yeah, I was going to use my question as a opportunity to talk about the kind of thing that you talked about there, Sarah, and I think everybody did as well. Austerity just creates more problems. It's used as something to save a bit of money here, but actually all we're doing is kicking the problems down the line and making those problems more expensive and more costly, more severe somewhere else down the line. And I shared in the chat here a document which has got case studies from England and Wales about the SED in practice. And this is just, you know, just a short few case studies. But I think the overwhelming kind of sense that you get from the case studies is that how commencement of the SED allows local authorities to have an argument against some of the kind of measures of austerity that are being asked to be inflicted upon them. They've got a reason to push back and say, we have done some monitoring, we've talked to stakeholders, we've talked to community group partnerships, we've talked to our local residents, and we don't feel that we can do this because of, you know, X, Y, and Z. So it's, you know, while there are clearly resource pressures and finance pressures and budget pressures, which are, you know, being given as reasons why a certain cut might need to be made, there's also, you know, if you're having to look at everything through the lens of, are we going to make outcomes worse for people that are already suffering from socioeconomic disadvantage, then it's a reason to be able to push back. And I think, you know, I think it's specifically, I mean, I picked the example of Hackney, which is in that case study, but that's because that's where I'm sitting. But I think, and as a resident of Hackney, I can really feel that the response to the pandemic, during the pandemic and post-pandemic for people, was very different to, you know, my neighbouring borough here, you know, in Haringey as well. So I think you know, the number one thing it does is give local authorities some argument to push back against cuts that they know are just going to be devastating for people.
Thanks ever so much, Priya. We have got one more question that's just popped in, thankfully. Dave, Sean and Ian have spoken of the challenges faced by essential public services. Priya clearly outlining the trappings of intergenerational poverty. Didn't finish the question. Oh, glad Ian mentioned investment. Government has big focus on investment in high profit yielding industries such as energy. How do we get the government to commit to invest in people? Apologies, that was a bit broken up. But yeah, if anybody wants to jump in on that.
Well, I'll start. I suppose my answer ranges across a whole host of different imperatives for this government, because what we've seen in 14 years is how austerity has fractured a community in this country. This is probably, in my long career, the most divisive atmosphere I've ever seen, and that was played out, wasn't it, in the summer riots? But just the everyday contact between people, particularly on social media, it's very hard to have a rational discussion between people. It's kind of either for or against and hatred in between sort of thing. And I think it's more than just money. It's about trying to change culture. But you never change people's culture unless you offer them hope. And, you know, I talked about people gathering around the Reform Party when I last spoke to you a few minutes ago. But actually, if they think they're the only people listening to them, then they'll follow them. And one thing is clear, that not everybody who votes Reform, for example, is racist, quintessentially. They have lost hope. They have lost all idea that politicians are for them. So I think the approach is, of course, around investment and rebuilding and bringing communities back together. And this is what I think the big challenge is. How do we actually achieve a proper levelling up agenda that makes people in our communities feel involved, feel that their views are worthy, and feel that they're going to make a difference? So for me, it's a huge, huge issue for this government. It's going to take more than 5 years. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Does anybody else want to respond?
I can come in with something.
Go on, Priya.
I think Ian's absolutely right that, you know, people need hope and people need to believe that change is possible, you know, change is both possible and desirable, and that, you know, there is a route for people to be part of that change. So I think we need more work on participative democracy, more work on devolution, more, you know, power to the people. And I think if we don't have that, we're, you know, I think at the moment there's the level of distrust in democracy is growing. People feel that they've either got no representation from their elected officials, or they've got misrepresentation because they voted for a party that they think is going to deliver one thing and they haven't. And the more that grows, the more disaffected and disillusioned people are going to become. And then there's a huge void where, you know, all kind of monsters take shape. So I think we need to, as quickly as possible, give people a sense of hope and a sense of agency that change is both possible and desirable, and that they can have an impact on change. So more participation, more devolution, more power to the people.
I like the sound of that. Dave?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I was just going to, that the hope one is really important, and I think for our members, our social workers, that they need that hope as well. It can be a bit of a long slog, you know, when you are up against it and everything's at crisis and the resources are not there and people are desperate. I do think funding is the issue, and it is for a lot of things. But if we have a better, you know, there's more people doing the job, more people out there, less people are stressed, and then more people have got time. And sometimes where social workers are talking to people that may not have really opened up and ever shared problems and trauma throughout their lives, and that's a huge privilege. But if we can't do that because we're too pressured, how's that supposed to happen? And just finally, just before I finish, just going to say, social workers are really keen and always willing to be involved in social policy design. I mean, we know quite a bit about it, actually. So I think, yeah, we'd happily be involved in that. Some of the policies that affect the people that social workers support.
Thanks.
Yeah, I don't have a lot else to add. Just agree with all my colleagues who've spoken so well there. I suppose from a personal level, I emerged into the labour market just after the 2008 financial crisis, and I know that my generation have only ever seen things get worse. And I suppose that's why I think that kind of idea of hope and the possibility of difference would be so valuable to people who've never really known anything other than austerity. Yeah, I just think hope's really, really vital here.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Look, it's 5 to 4. I am a firm believer of not continuing meetings just to continue meetings. I know we had an hour. We're nearly at the hour. thank you ever so much to everybody for your contributions, for those that have joined and had to nip off to go vote, and for those that couldn't meet. We're going to get this out and clips out there so that MPs can, you know, listen to everything, and we're going to email everything out to them so they'll get the pack, they'll get the video and recording and everything else that we've got. Please do sign the EDM that's out there, that's in the chat. That will be included in the email, and look out for an email in the coming weeks for our budget day action on the 30th of October, because we know the Chancellor has got a real opportunity on the 30th of October to reverse austerity and to change the lives of our class, our members, our communities going forward. So thank you ever so much for everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Hope it's not raining where you are like it is here, and see you all soon.